And away we go. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be in the world today. This is, of course, Coffee Talk, talking about the news and the world in general. And of course, you can find me on YouTube at Coffee Talk Live or Prepper University on YouTube, as well as at Coffee Talk Chat on X, formerly known as Twitter, if you are so inclined. And then again, there's also Fistful of Radio. That's fistfulofradio.com. Podcasting out of Atlanta Monday through Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and Friday at noon as we get ready to dive into the news and see what's going on in the world here today. Some things you may have heard about, some things maybe not. What, you want to get up, Dusty? Dusty, everybody. Real quick, for those of you who can see, one of our cats. You want to get down? Dusty wants to move around. There's another cat in the hallway playing with something. She's probably curious. And of course, for those of you who are able to join us in the live portion, which takes place on both YouTube channels simultaneously at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, that is Coffee Talk and Prep University. I do try to read through as many of the comments as is plausible, so that those of you who are listening and not able to see can keep up with the conversation. I'll go ahead and greet some of the people who have chimed in so far. I see Helter today, Dragon, Donna Beaver, Cruising is here, Urban Angst is here. He says, click the like button to tickle the algorithm. Much appreciated, Urban. Thumbs up, always appreciated. Rodney is here, all the way from New Zealand. Is it still new? Should it be Old Zealand now? Bingo is here. Deanna is here. Cyberjack Senior, all people, has chimed in thus far to let us know that they are there. And of course, like I said, we'll go ahead and start diving into some of what's going on in the world today in a moment. So some of the topics from the news, some of this, some of that, and some of the other. Some of the absurdities in the news that I can pick on and be sarcastic about, which it seems like is mostly what I end up doing because of the absurdity of so much of what we read in these news articles. And Armored Ghost is here. It says, treat the Monday blues with coffee and talk. Couldn't hurt. There are worse things you could be doing with your Monday afternoon, as the case may be. And yeah, we're going to talk about, guess who? Brandon Johnson again. Brandon Johnson. First, everything was Texas's fault. Then everything was Lori Lightfoot's fault. Now he's a failure because of racism, according to the Washington Examiner, which says Brandon Johnson turns to wild racism accusations to excuse his failures. Okay, it's always somebody else. It's always somebody else. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson is losing control of his city. Losing control or already lost? And he is losing his grasp of reality along with it. Now, he knows what he's doing because that's what people with a victimhood mentality do. Blame everyone else. I can't control it. It's because of them. In order to defend his job performance, Johnson has embraced the time-honored political tradition of blaming the last guy for all your problems. Johnson blamed the previous city council for not budgeting for 2023's migrant mission. Chicago, a sanctuary city, is now leaving illegal immigrants to live on the streets in the winter because it doesn't have room for them. The city recently had to set aside another $150 million to try and keep up with the crisis as it stares down a budget shortfall of over $500 million next year. Ooh, that's not good at all. Not for the Illinois taxpayers. Not only have we stood up the full force of government in a collaborative way, we did it without the previous city council even providing resources for it, Johnson said. Yeah, it's their fault. But Johnson did not stop at this basic political tactic. The border crisis and the busing of illegal immigrants to Chicago has the city reeling, and so Johnson's comments turned to degraded conspiracy theories. Quote, everyone knows that the right-winged extremism in this country is targeted democratically run cities, Johnson said. It is abysmal, and it is an affront for everything that is good about this country, for the extremism in this country to use people as political tools to settle political scores for something that happened over 400 years ago. 400 years ago, wouldn't if he's talking about slavery, wasn't that over 150 years ago? Maybe he's talking about slavery in a different country. In conclusion, Johnson argued that Republicans are still mad that a black man is free in this country. That's a little bit one-sided, but I get the point. Yes, Johnson thinks his city collapsing under the weight of the border crisis is because Republicans are mad about the end of slavery, not because Chicago invited illegal immigrants to cross the border illegally by declaring itself a sanctuary city, flooding Texas and other border states and straining their resources to the point where they began sending those illegal immigrants to Chicago. At least they're calling them illegal immigrants instead of migrants. And it says, no, Johnson thinks this is a grand racist conspiracy. I think that's misspelled. I think it's supposed to say now. I'm going to assume, because it makes more sense if it says now Johnson thinks this is a grand racist conspiracy that has been fueled by 400 years of resentment, even though slavery ended just over 150 years ago. And there it is. Unbelievable. Let me catch up a couple more comments here. I see the Warden and Monkey has joined us as well. Glad you could make it today. Urban says, looks like Mayor Johnson didn't pull the fire alarm in time. No. And Helter says, in debate, what Johnson is doing is called deflection. Rather than answer how he can fix the city's problem, he instead changes the subject to blame someone else. Correct. And Boogers is here. Boogers made it today. Dragon says Johnson will also falsely label anyone who disagrees with him as a right-wing extremist in order to reinforce the boogeyman concept. Yeah, it's not because I can't do the job. It's because of right-wing extremists and racists and Republicans and white people and, anyone else you can lump in there. Hell, he even buried Lori Lightfoot. And they're on the same page. It's incredible the way that works, and the shifting of responsibility. And in life, when you're connected to something, you have to take some responsibility for it. Okay, you know what? Chicago's been a mess for a long time. He inherited a mess. That's true. And you can put some of that blame on the city council, and you can put some of that blame on Lori Lightfoot, and you can put some of that blame on the people that were in positions before Lori Lightfoot and before the current administration in Chicago. But what are you doing now is the question. What are you doing now? Even if it's only 10% his fault, that's still 10%. And he should try to own it. Okay, you know what? I'm not doing that great of a job here either. If you don't know what to do, admit it. At least people will respect you for it, I think. Yeah, you know what? I'm overwhelmed. If anybody has any suggestions, because I want to get this done right, I could respect that if he was sincere. But no, we're not going to do that. We're going to blame everybody else. It's everyone else's fault all the time. All the time. And what are you going to do, folks? What are you going to do, folks? Also, again, wanted to say a thank you. Wanted to give a shout out to whoever it was that sent the Blue Buffalo cat food to the P.O. box, because it was anonymous. So I just wanted to throw it out there and say thank you to whoever that was. And Gary Smith made it. He says he's late. That's okay, Gary. Glad you could pop in today. And All People says post-slavery, post-segregation area migrant blacks constantly whine about slavery and segregation despite arriving after both were gone. Yeah, it seems that way, doesn't it? Pretty much. I'm sure not all of them, but enough that it's an issue. I don't know what Brandon Johnson's family history is. I suppose I could always look it up if I were so inclined, or anyone else could. If you guys are curious about it and you want to know what Brandon Johnson's family history is, you can find it, I'm sure. Urban says, imagine the gall it takes to blame skin color on the clear failure of every single Democrat policy. Literally every policy sucks. Not only that, but Show me a non-black person in authority in Chicago. Just saying. It's primarily black leadership. And Merv says, what is corrupt government? What is our corrupt government plan with all these fighting age illegal immigrants in every city? I saw a theory on MonkeyWorks on YouTube. And then Deanna says, Blue Buffalo can help underweight cats gain. Interesting. I don't know if I have any underweight cats, but I think they're all doing pretty good. They're all doing pretty good. We take pretty good care of them. We enjoy taking care of them. We love our furry friends, whether they are allowed in the house or they have to stay in the yard, because there's a few that we can't let in because they have marking tendencies. But we enjoy taking care of them. Now we're going to jump to The Hill. The Hill has an interesting article, and you can probably guess why I wanted to bring this up today. But we'll go ahead and we'll read through the article. Again, this is The Hill. It says UAW, United Auto Workers, backs Israel-Hamas ceasefire, largest union to do so. It says the United Auto Workers Union endorsed a long-term ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war Friday, becoming the largest union in the U.S. to do so. UAW International is calling for an immediate permanent ceasefire in Israel and Palestine so that we can get the work of building a lasting peace, building social justice, and building a community of global community of solidarity. That's a really broken sentence there. UAW Regional Director Brandon Mansilla said Friday in front of the White House alongside protesters on a hunger strike. You remember them? They were still on the hunger strike on Friday, even though Hamas broke the agreement on Thursday, and on Friday they were back in full war. And again, I will remind you, talked about it a few times last week, it's not a hunger strike if you have a designated end date. That is called a fast. The American Postal Workers Union, UE Union, and a multitude of smaller labor organizations have already backed a ceasefire, an effort that has divided Democrats and put pressure on the Biden administration. A week-long pause in fighting ended early Friday after about 100 Hamas-held hostages and 240 Palestinians prisoners were released in a tenuously kept deal. That's really off balance, 100 to 240. A growing chorus of Democrats have called on the Biden administration to push for a long-term ceasefire in the conflict, citing increasing civilian casualties in Gaza. However, both the administration and the Israeli government have so far refused that the conflict. And keep that in mind, both people on both sides of the war, their leadership doesn't want to back down. It's not like it's one and not the other. Okay. I have several problems with this, as you can well guess. And Armored wants to know if I have any Siamese cats. No, I do not have any Siamese cats. I've got some tuxedo cats. I've got some solid colored. I've got some tiger stripe and other oddly patterned cats, but no Siamese. No Siamese. Problem number one is this attitude that all of these protesters and organizations and everybody has, that they in another country have so much power and influence, they can influence two other governments halfway around the world. Like Israel or Hamas gives a damn what the United Auto Workers have to say about it, or the United Postal Workers, or any of these other unions that are out there protesting. You think they care? You're not out there fighting. You're not helping either side. Oh, we insist on a ceasefire. You know what? Go to Gaza and ask them to cease fire. Problem number two, I'm sorry, did I miss something? Because my impression is that the function of a union is to represent its workers. Where did we get to the point where these were such openly political organizations? I mean, I know they've always been kind of political, and usually it had a lot to do with like backdoor handshakes and, dirty deals done dirt cheap. Now they're so open and vocal about it, like they themselves are political parties. Why don't you represent your workers? How about that? That's what you're getting paid for. Your money is being taken out of your workers' paycheck by force. They didn't volunteer for it. All right, if they're in the union, dues are paid for you to represent them, not to fly to DC and protest a war in another country. I see Semper Fi has made it today. Glad you could join us. Monkey says, I'm surprised Hamas is even working with the U.S. I would have assumed Hamas would give back the hostages dead within the exchange. Well, I mean, they're getting more hostile people. I know that there's an argument that a lot of the people that Israel released into the Gaza to Hamas are younger people or women, but they were being held for a reason. These were violent people. Dragon says, why would any union come out with any political takes that aren't relevant to labor? Are they trying to push people away again? They have one job. No kidding. And Tomcats says, what's up? Late again as per usual. Well, glad you could make it, Tomcats, anyways. Nature Nerd says unions can get locked into bad contracts where the pay increase yearly is less than non-union workers' pay increases. Yeah, and that's also the thing where instead of working off of merit, you're working off of a contract. You get employees who do less than they could. And then if you have an employee who is outstanding, they can't progress because the contract will hold them back. It's really a mess. It is not what it started out to be by a long shot. And again, I've made this argument. Unions always want to throw out, oh, it's because of us that there's no children working in coal mines, and it's because of us there are no 18-hour days. First of all, you're taking credit for things that were done over a century ago by other people in different unions. Second of all, yeah, the hell you can work an 18-hour day in a union job. It's called forced overtime, and I've been there. I've been there a few times with Frito-Lay with that crap. Urban says the unions are not for the American worker. They serve their socialist handlers in D.C. Their open support for terrorist action is one of the final stages of an organization's corruption. Yeah, remember the Nazis started with a labor union. Semper Fi says the union I was in loved to take money every paycheck, but acted like it was a chore when we had a dispute with the employer. Yeah, and I've had that argument about unions several times. You ask them for help and they don't want to help you. When I came to the union in Frito-Lay for help, they wanted me to do something illegal rather than help out. Because I was having a lot of trouble because of my son and because of the forced overtime and trying to get him in conflicts with my ex and all of that. The problem is that instead of helping me with shielding me from some of that forced overtime, they told me to fake an ailment with a quote union doctor they would set me up with so that I could claim FMLA. And I'm like, you want me to break the law instead of trying to help me negotiate with management? Yeah, that's great. That'll work out great. And Gorgor is here, and he says a new sub because of Tomcats World shared the link. Well, glad you could join us, Gorgor, and thank you, Tomcats. I appreciate that. And as we travel on here, Monkey says essentially union workers can work very less since they have contracted the wages while non-unions work more, and that creates conflict with the management. They instead of being a middleman between management and the employees, they end up acting as an adjutant between the two. That's been my experience, again, for unions, although technically two of them were Teamsters, but one was Teamsters with a school bus company and one was Teamsters with UPS. Cruising says local unions I can grudgingly accept when there's no competition. State and national unions are political groups that don't care about workers. As we wind up a couple more comments and then we'll get on with the articles. Helter says the UAW union doesn't realize the UAW will not honor ceasefire agreements. And Legends is here. Glad you could make it, Legends. And Helter says the UAW union doesn't realize Hamas will not honor ceasefire agreements. No, they never have. And All People says unions should not have the right to spend an employee's money for foreign causes, or foreign causes, he means. He writes in code sometimes so that ScrewTube won't try to block his comments. And that's the thing also, is how is the money being spent? How are they representing you as the employer? I mean, not the employer, but as the employee. How are they running their ship? And on top of that, how many times have you seen articles on, and I've done a few on this show, where some high official in a union, usually it's a fire department, police union, something like that, has stolen a ton of money, hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars, that they cannot recover. And this is why you always see fire departments out there with the boot begging for money for funeral expenses. That should be something the union can help them cover if the money was still there. It's really disgusting, quite frankly. Really disgusting. And Crystal Smith is here, also subbed because of Tomcat's World. Much appreciated, guys. Glad you could chime in today as I crack open the next article as we get around to it here. If I can get around to it. StreamYard is a little slow on the uptick on occasion. And this is from US News. US News. Big surprise, everybody. The US is running out of money. It says U.S. is running out of money for Ukraine, and that could hinder fight against Russia. White House warns. Yeah, you think? And it's not just because of the. It's not just because of the war in Ukraine. The U.S. dumps money all over the world. Okay, the Ukraine and Israel have gotten to be two big ones. The Ukraine mostly is Israel's the new kid on the block for the Biden administration dumping tons of money, U.S. taxpayer dollars, out of the country, where U.S. taxpayers don't want it, because U.S. taxpayers are not being represented really very well, are they? So you throw all this money all over the globe. There's more being spent globally than just the Ukraine and Israel. And it's something that Trump was trying to get away from. You may not like Trump, got to give him credit for that. I know some people aren't too fond of him, but it is what it is. Again, U.S. News, and it says Washington. If it'll stop bouncing around, those pop-up ads drive me nuts. The Biden administration on Monday sent Congress an urgent warning about the need to approve tens of billions of dollars in military and economic assistance to Ukraine, saying Kiev's war effort to defend itself from the Russia invasion may grind to a halt without it. If the U.S. wasn't interfering, just making the point, Russia probably would have gone and smashed Ukraine and left by now, because they like to do that. They've done it a few times since the fall of the Soviet Empire, where they went into one of the border states, pounded the hell out of them for some reason, destroyed some power plants, whatever, and then they leave. This would have been over. This would have been over by now, I think. That's just a personal opinion. In a letter to House and Senate leaders and released publicly, Office of Management and Budget Director Shalonda Young warned the U.S. will run out of funding to send weapons and assistance to the Ukraine by the end of the year, saying that would kneecap Ukraine on the battlefield. They're already kneecapped. They're hanging by a thread, and they're counting on those donations for, lush vacations for the president and his wife, and to help fund the war effort as well. There's a little bit of that in there. So they're already kneecapped. Hell, they're kneecapped all the way up to the hip. They've fallen and they can't get up. But why are we funding this? It's only a hop, skip, and a jump before we got boots on the ground officially in the Ukraine at this point. She added the U.S. has already run out of money that it has used to prop up Ukraine's economy. And if Ukraine's economy collapses, they will not be able to keep fighting, full stop. We are out of money and nearly out of time, she wrote. This is just a setup, quite frankly, for another threat of a government shutdown, which we have seen crap tons of since the Obama administration. It's happened in the past, here and there, every few years. Oh, there might be a shutdown. Oh, it's been narrowly avoided. But since the Obama administration, it's been accelerating to the point where we've had 5 this year? Does anybody even believe it? Does anybody even care? I don't believe it. And I see Places You Can't Go is here. And he's talking to Gore, Crystal, and Tomcat. And he says, where's everyone else? I don't know, but I'm glad you could join us today. Nature Nerd says several of his older coworkers tell him how bad forced overtime has been in the past. Also, unions don't have any flexible schedules like non-union workers. You have to work 40 hours a week. Yeah. The only jobs, and I've brought this up before, and some people have challenged me to it and been like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, but whatever. The only jobs I've ever worked where there was forced overtime were union jobs. Urban says, good point. There was a ceasefire which Hamas broke by firing a rocket while two Hamas psychos shot up a bus station lineup in Jerusalem. Yeah, and we showed the video clip from that Friday. That's why the ceasefire ended. They blew it because they don't care. They're barely cooperating now because that's how it works. Again, analogical thought process in a tribal society that runs on a shame honor system. We've talked about it many times. And the Western mindset of rational logical thought, that kind of thing doesn't make sense. You have to understand the people. God, go take a philosophy class, something. Try to figure it out. You're just wasting money. You're wasting time. All People says the people that I've met were never helped by their union, even when they were desperately in need of help. In fact, they didn't play ball. The union turned on them. And Tomcat's World says, Prep University, my army shares the love because unity through community. Much appreciated, Tomcats. Absolutely. And Frankie M is here. He says, afternoon, everyone. Glad you could make it. And Places says, pretty good jag outside the decompression chamber. Bingo says, I told you about my union before, the same one you were in, but in the Hershey's branch. Is that the BC TGM? I was in the BC TGM when I was working for Frito-Lay. Bingo said, yeah, the same one you were in, but the Hershey's branch, they took money from the company so the company could shut down, and the union looked the other way. And Gorgor says, Tomcat's World shared a video of you and your wife in the woods talking about bugging out, and it was an awesome video. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you appreciated that. We try. Just try to. We haven't done a walk and talk in a while. Her schedule changed. We used to work together in the same place, and now she's doing something else. But we just try to get people thinking. Just get the wheels turning, not telling anybody what to do or anything like that. But sometimes that's enough. Urban says, regarding Ukraine funding, the Bidens must keep plugging coins into the washing machine to keep it spinning. No kidding. Gary says, never would have started if NATO had left Ukraine alone to begin with. Very well, NATO has to make itself relevant again. It hasn't been relative since the wall came down in Germany. Nature Nerd says, modern survivalists showed a video explaining the parallels between Argentina and the U.S. on reckless spending and socialist policies. It could turn out bad. Yes, indeed. And Tomcat says Biden is scrambling to get more money for Vladimir Zelensky. Yeah, Voldemort Zelensky. And one more here real quick. Monkey says, now the actor president of Ukraine will have to stop playing Hollywood and actually have to face the reality that they're about to lose and be out of money. Well, if they got screwed, he would just leave the country. They would just leave the country. But I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars have been put into that country for everything from bullets to pensions. And it's our taxpayer money. And we don't have it. We don't have it right now. It's been hard on us. It's been hard on the U.S. taxpayers, and it's getting ridiculous. It's getting absolutely ridiculous. And one more from Cruising. He says, I'm a sector lead for the union. I've been in place 2 months now. I've helped 5 people so far. My role simply amounts to someone who can state the obvious to HR without being canned for it, and it's sad. I can quite imagine Cruising. I've been there, although I never represented the union. I'll say that. I've never been a rep on behalf of the union. And then everybody, what's funny about that too, is every place I've ever worked, whenever they talk about the union rep, they always say, yeah, he's a company man. He's a sellout. He's a stooge. Didn't you vote for him? How did he get the job? I don't know. You don't trust your own guy. You don't trust your own guy. But while we're talking about Biden, sweet old, lovable, old, trustworthy, huggable, snuggly soft Uncle Joe Biden, Washington Examiner says the Biden rule takes lunch money from schools that reject progressive gender sexuality agenda. Oh no, say it isn't so. Say it isn't so. And this is why I've been harping on it recently. The last three presidencies, the Obama administration reintroduced racial divide. The Trump administration reintroduced political divide. And of all things, the Biden administration is pushing a sexual divide because now everybody's confused. Nobody knows what the hell they are, right? There's all this transmogrified garbage and all this alphabet mafia soup and everything else. And he has really pushed those agendas. Really pushed those agendas. And Tomcat says he has to get back to work now. Stay strong and safe out there. Well, glad you could join us, Tomcat. And of course, we're always on the, you can always catch us after the fact because these are saved and you should be able to find them in the live streams. And Bingo says, I'm sorry, it wasn't the union. In whole, it was our representative that took money. The president of the chapter asked us why we agreed to the terms. He was shocked to find out that our representative told us to. Okay. But here we go. The center square. It says a new Biden administration rule forces schools to comply with progressive ideology on gender and sexuality or risk losing the federal aid for free and reduced priced school lunches. Legal observers say that it is just the first in a slew of new rules on the horizon tying federal education funding to far-left policies on gender and sexuality. The school lunch funding controversy began in May of 2022, as the Center Square previously reported, with an announcement from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which handles federal help for school lunches. The USDA said at the time it would change its longstanding interpretation of Title IX, the law broadly governed discrimination protections in education. USDA said it would expand its previous prohibition against discriminating based on sex to include discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. School lunch funding goes through the Food and Nutrition Service, the FNS division of the USDA. As a result, state and local agencies, program operators, and sponsors that receive funds from FNS must investigate allegations of discrimination based on gender identity or sexual orientation. USDA said in a statement, those organizations must also update their non-discrimination policies and signage to include prohibitions against discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation. Blah, 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 freaking blah, and on and on and on. Bottom line, I'm going to translate it real quick. We have an agenda. We're going to pretend it's about discrimination, and we're going to hurt the children that we claim we protect by attacking the school lunch program to force schools to adopt a federal policy if the state votes against that policy. It's blackmail. It's extortion, rather. That's extortion. Using federal money, your tax dollars, because it's not free. It's not really assistance. It's your tax dollars that they return to the states in the form of an aid package for the school lunch program, which should all be free anyways. When I went to school, we didn't pay for the lunches. If you're going to take all my tax money and then force my kid to go to school, and I have no choice but to put them into public school, which is very heavily funded. It's a massive money pit. you could at least feed them. It's the least you could do without stipulations. Cruising says the alphabet soup and trans thing has been coming strong out of the online gaming community since around 2010. Started seeing it shift in the schools in 2015-ish, and now it's mainstream since 2020. Yeah, the gaming community hates it. There's a lot of protest about that in the gaming community. Cruising says schools have been held hostage to left-wing ideals in return for funding since the mid-'80s. It hasn't always been so obvious, though. And Merv says, how many times did Dylan Mulvaney go to the White House to meet with President Biden? I'm not sure about that, actually. I don't have a number. And Gary says, here schools are being forced to accept a particular gender ideology. In Russia, the courts just declared alphabet stuff illegal, or so I've heard. And Helter says, heard this on another forum. 18-year-olds aren't mature enough to own a firearm, but 5-year-olds are mature enough to decide what gender they want to be. The whole administration is insane. Yeah, and that's a plausible argument because they're trying to take that away. They're trying to take that away from people. To make it older. They don't want them to smoke. They don't want them to drink. They don't want them to own a firearm unless they're in the military, because they're certainly old enough to kill or be killed for their country. But, oh yeah, little 5-year-old Timmy thinks he needs his grapes cut off. No problem. No problem. Let's get him a prescription for estrogen and hormone blockers and whatever else we can inject him with, because that stuff's expensive. And get him on the operating table and do some permanent damage, because if he changes his mind, you can't fix it. And Urban says West Clock Town Council, Alberta, will have a municipal plebiscite in early 2024 to ban rainbow sidewalks and flags. It's called the Sidewalk and Flagpole Bylaw. And Dragon says, I can't begin to imagine the misery and sorrow that these children will face once they are adults because of the mistakes their parents and schools pushed them into. It's a horror story. And we're already seeing it. There are many, many young people that are coming of age now that went through all of this ideology, that has had these surgeries, that has had these injections, saying, it was a mistake. I didn't know what I was doing. I was encouraged by doctors. I was encouraged by counselors in the school and my parents. And now they're trying to sue people. They're trying to sue schools. They're trying to sue doctors. More and more of this is happening. So we're seeing, maybe it'll break the generational curse. Hopefully, we can pray on it. And Nature Nerd says, whenever we get a pay increase, they increase the union dues with it. Yeah, there you go. That was my argument about the first time I was in the Teamsters, when I was with Durham. I was working with Durham School Services in Illinois, school bus company. And when I went to Illinois, they wanted to transfer my contract because they were like, yeah, you're a really good driver. Let me see if they could use you at the hub in Illinois or, the Chicago area, wherever. And I was like, yeah, sure. And I went up there and had to join the union before they would even talk to me. And then found out that I had to retrain all of my licensing at my own expense. I don't know if it's still like that because I heard it changed, but it was on me. That I was going to get more pay, but then with the union fees, it negated the pay increase. So I was like, wait a minute. And there was no bonuses. When I worked in Kansas, there were bonuses. There was bonuses. The pay was even. They paid for all training. No union. Illinois, totally different story. And I was like, this is pointless. This is pointless. All People says Obama's entire family on both sides, including his many biological stepdad and both maternal grandparents, were CIA agents. And that Jazz kid already regrets what his parents did to him. Yeah, I've heard that one, Jazz. So they're using a government program that's already paid for, taxpayer funded, to coerce schools into sticking with federal guidelines, even if the school council and even if the city, state, county, whatever, votes against those ideologies, which is why we're supposed to have states with independent constitutions anyways, so that if there's something the federal government is doing that doesn't jive with what the people in the state need or want, they can circumvent it, like what Texas is doing right now with the border. And that just really frustrates me. I hate the way they abuse our money. They don't care at all. They do not care at all. They take so much from us and they give so little back. And what they do give is ours anyways. And they don't do it in a way that's structured or even makes sense half the time, spending the money on things that most Americans would not agree to. Throwing money into worthless programs or inappropriate programs, or sending it overseas to try to manipulate or coerce or pay somebody off. It's very frustrating. Very frustrating, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately. As we continue on. And is this talking about the same thing? I've got another one here talking about pretty much the same thing. And this one, I think, has to do with federal grants. It's also the Washington Examiner. And they're using the same methodology to manipulate grant subsidies with transmogrified ideology. White House proposing to attach federal grant money to transgender ideology. White House Office of Management and Budget is seeking to force recipients of federal grant money to accept transmogrified ideology in order to be eligible according to the proposed rules. OBM's grant guidance is used as a government-wide standard which all agencies follow when allocating federal money. The Biden administration's proposed rule, for which the public comment period closes December 4th, so it's already too late, strips grant allocation guidance of religious and other First Amendment protections while applying an expanded definition of, quote, sex discrimination to include gender identity. They're taking the longstanding rule and they're revising it to cut out longstanding protections for religious liberty, constitutional and statutory protections. To be clear, Rachel Morrison, a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, told the Washington Examiner, they're taking something that should be neutral, that should be properly implementing constitutional and statutory requirements and sound management for the government, and they're making it ideological. They're making it very partisan. The new rule, if implemented, would mean that any recipient of federal dollars, including contractors, schools, and nonprofit groups, would be subject to ideological restrictions to dollars that Congress appropriates. Changes proposed to Section 200-300, called Statutory and National Policy Requirements, removes the requirement that grants be allocated in a manner that protects free speech, religious liberty, public welfare, the environment, and prohibits discrimination. It also inserts language that requires grant allocation processes to look out for sex discrimination, which now includes protections for sexual orientation and gender identity, consistent with the Supreme Court's reasoning in Bostock versus Clayton County. That decision, authorized by Justice Neil Gorsuch, introduced gender identity into the definition of sex in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits employment discrimination. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. You're going to force me, in order to get a grant, in order to be eligible to accept policies that I don't agree with. That's thought policing if this passes. And we'll find out after today, I guess. Nature Nerd says these people would be better off in their world countries where they didn't have the option to get gender surgeries when they were young in the first place. And he means third world. And Frankie M says, how are they supposed to enforce this on schools? The school could just agree with the mandate but not comply. Yeah, but then, when they go looking for their rainbow flags and when they go looking for people to be calling kids him, her, he, she, they, this, that, or whatever, then they'll know. Somebody's going to be there to rat them out and to enforce it. Some counselor, somebody whose job it is to be the designated brown shirt will rat them out. There's always somebody who's going to tell. Nature Nerd says these people would be better off. Oh, he's just repeating himself there. Just repeating himself there. They have ways of finding out. People are not honest. And they're backstabbing. People will stab each other in the back for just the satisfaction of having inconvenienced someone. It's the code compliance argument. Code compliance. My wife used to work for the city of Atlanta. They don't drive around neighborhoods looking for problems. They have designated places that they sit. If they have a route, they just sit there and they wait for a call. And they say, hey, go check out such and such an address. We have a complaint that the grass is too high. Then they drive out there. How did the complaint go through? Because a neighbor was pissed off at you and called code compliance just for the satisfaction of getting you in trouble. They don't go looking for you. They don't care. Urban says gender surgeries won't stop until the first multi-million-dollar lawsuit payout. We're getting to that point because the lawsuits are coming. A lot of the people who have gone through these surgeries are regretting it now for a lot of reasons, for a variety of reasons, because of the life-changing surgery, because it can't be reversed, because they grew up and realized, wow, I was just a kid imagining something and I got encouraged and peer pressure and pushed into it, that they have scars that will never heal, that they have to take medications for the rest of their lives, that they have to be modified for the rest of their lives, especially if you're male going to female. There's things that you have to do every day to maintain basically an open wound. The fact that they can't have sex or procreate. Sex is almost out of the question. So that their lives are miserable. It's a miserable existence. And sooner or later, enough of them are going to speak out and not give in to the peer pressure anymore of, the silence. Silence equals death used to be their motto. It needs to be again, because the silence from the peer pressure in their community is killing them emotionally. And Bingo says the schools have audits from the government, correct? Of course they do. They justify all that money. Cruising says schools are overloaded with left-wingers who will rat it out and push it. If that fails, schools are a favored target for easy money lawsuits, as the school system will always settle over litigation. Yeah, it's always easier to settle. Although if you do settle, then often you get a gag order. You end up with a gag order, and then you can't talk about whatever it was you settled on. And then the word doesn't get around. I'd almost rather drag it through court than settle, just so that I could talk as much as I want. Jumping to the LA Times here. Taxpayers' rescue of Skid Row's largest landlord nears $40 million. And here we go. Skid Row, everybody. Los Angeles City taxpayer costs to rescue the failed nonprofit Skid Row Housing and Trust. How's that for a title for you? Are now expected to approach $40 million, and that's taxpayer dollars, of course, with officials warning more dollars will be needed in mid-2023. 2024. The price tag stems from the trust's financial collapse earlier this year, which led to the city petitioning a court for a receivership to oversee the charity's 29 buildings and more than 1,000 formerly homeless tenants. Well, I mean, what's the point of getting them off the streets if they're just going to sit in a building? I don't, is there nothing constructive for them to do? The city assumed the trust's operating and repair costs with the hope of stabilizing the properties and turning them over to other nonprofit housing providers. The alternative of abandoning Skid Row's largest landlord, city officials say, would destroy affordable housing, blight the community, and force scores of people on the streets. Isn't that what Los Angeles already looks like? The destruction of affordable housing, they don't have it. Blight on the community, that is Los Angeles, and force scores of people onto the streets. They're already out there. Quote, we are trying to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe, City Council member Bob Blumenfield said in an interview. Your city's already a catastrophe. Last Wednesday, the city's Housing and Homelessness Committee approved $15 million in spending, primarily to cover expenses through June. The amount which needs to be signed off from the full council is on top of $22.7 million allocated earlier this year to handle the trust's demise. Other landlords already have taken over 7 trust properties, with another 10 expected to transfer out of the receivership in the coming months. That will leave a dozen of the trust's oldest and most troubled buildings, which will then be targeted for redevelopment, mostly as studio apartment complexes for the same cohort of tenants. The city's spending does not include expenses for the 12 properties past June, nor the city's contribution to rebuilding them. Initial estimates of city's redevelopment costs have been $70 million, while taking years to complete. So far, the city's rescue efforts have been beset by mistakes, blown budgets, and a reliance on the same deficient financial structure that had contributed to the trust's problems. You can't maintain buildings like that. You can't maintain these places. And there's a variety of reasons for it. A couple more comments real quick. Nature Nerd says Venezuela might invade Guyana. They claimed the country in an election. I think the French would protect it, though. Good. They can send all of those fighting age men who have flooded into France to Guyana to fight. Bingo says he's got to go. He's got to go. Glad you could make it. Frankie says 100% correct about LA. Urban says he bets the nonprofit landlords began accepting illegal migrants, they would have enough money to send their own kids to Ivy League schools. Correct. And All People says you're right. Even the Bible says the wicked will do what they will do for the sport of it and because they love their sin and will not repent. Yeah, it does. But those buildings, places like that, they can't be maintained. This is why housing projects always fail. They always end up destroyed. Because you're taking an element that needs to be very strictly controlled and overseen and putting it into brand new buildings, and they're taking all their bad habits and all their problems with them without a willingness to change or to adapt to the new environment. So they destroy the environment. And I've brought it up before when I was still living in Massachusetts, and I worked in a building called Ronex. It was the Ronex Corporation in Brighton, Massachusetts. It was an office building when I was a kid, and this was in junior high school. I would go in the building at like 5 a.m. and clean all of their office restrooms and then go to school. Basically. And this is after delivering the newspaper, because I had the newspaper route. I was a carrier. And the guy who owned that building also owned the Faneuil Hill housing project. And he hated it. He was trying to get rid of it. He was trying to get rid of the building. Nobody would take it from him, or buildings. It was a complex. Nobody would take them because nobody wants to be connected to a housing project because it's a huge money pit. Almost everybody there, almost all of their rent was being paid for by the state through grants, Section 8 housing, and their portion of the rent was something like $15 or $20, and they never paid it, and he couldn't do anything to them about it. They spray painted the walls, they stole the light bulbs out of the hallways, they smashed open the mailboxes and stole mail. They routinely destroyed the buildings, and it was all he could do to keep up with the maintenance. And he was like, God, it's a nightmare. It's costing me millions to maintain that place, and all you get is the HUD and HND money for the Section 8 housing. They don't even pay their lousy $10-15 a month in rent. Urban says you can take the addict off the street, but too often the street follows. That's true. And Nature Nerd says price controls on apartments and government housing is a disaster. And Raccoon says my sister's husband worked on constructing a brand new apartment building in Philadelphia, and 2 years later they were trashed and the copper piping was ripped out in most of them. Not surprising. Not surprising at all. And if you try to crack down on them, it's oppression. Oh, you're oppressing your tenants. You're treating them badly. You're discriminating against them. You're stealing their humanity. There's nothing you can do. And there's a famous, I got to look it up because I always forget the name of the place, a documentary about a famous housing project that was like state-of-the-art housing project way back in the day, like in the 60s or 70s or something. And in that very documentary, and it always stuck with me about it, was that they would complain, former tenants, oh, nobody would help us. Nobody would come there. They wouldn't come to the housing project. You couldn't get the police to come. You couldn't get an ambulance, whatever. You couldn't get the phone company to come out there and set up a line. Not 15, 20 minutes later in the same documentary, the same people, all right, bragging, laughing about that when anybody would come, utility vehicles, the phone company had to come out, an electrician had to come out, a fire truck, a police car, whatever, would show up, a taxi cab. They would throw rocks and bricks and trash out of the windows, Molotov cocktails. So which is it? Which is it? You want help or you don't? Because you're complaining that these people won't help you, and when they do show up, you attack them. Then you complain about the condition of the building. Whose fault is it? Whose fault is it that there's drug dealing going on in the buildings, and prostitution in the buildings, and fires in the buildings, and trash, and feces, and destroyed property, and so on? Whose fault is that? But then you're going to blame the system for not coming to help you, but you're the one that drove them away. Fascinating double standard. Nature Nerd says, where would these people live if these housing projects weren't here? They'd be homeless, I guess, because most of them probably couldn't get a normal apartment. Inspector says, how long have you been on? Actually, we're in the last couple of minutes here. I've been on just about an hour so far, Spectre. Started at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, usually. And All People says Boston's no longer a town of Irish patriots. It's filled with socialists and black migrants from the Caribbean and African nations who hate America. And that is unfortunate if that's the case. There's I haven't been to Boston for decades, I think, right? Yeah, it's like decades at this point, I think, because I left there in like 99, 2000. And it was already a mess then. But again, this is Coffee Talk, and you are listening to and or watching Coffee Talk. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. That is at Coffee Talk Live on YouTube, as well as Prepper University, and or at Coffee Talk Chat on X, formerly known as Twitter, and Fistful of Radio. There's the sticker. It is a sticker, actually. Fistfulofradio.com, podcasting out of Atlanta Monday through Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and Friday at noon. So thank you, everybody who was able to join us here today. It's 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And he says he'll replay time. Sorry, I missed you. That's okay, Spectre. And again, yeah, you can catch the replay. Appreciate it. So thanks everybody who was able to join us here today. Hope you got something out of the conversation. And we will catch you again tomorrow.